Today, I'd like to talk about some of the environmental concerns that we are facing here on Long Island. One of the issues that's been drawing attention lately is what we call the PFAS sites. New York ranks 8th among 50 states with regard to these sites. 120,000 possible sites we see throughout the country. Now, the PFA class chemicals, they're potentially carcinogenic. They're in everything from cooking pans to firefighting foams. They are used in many uses, and really, when they were first manufactured, the thought was these are time savers, these are effective. But then over the years, people said, well, there seem to be some concerns with regard to them. So what can we do to minimize those concerns, obviously? Suffolk has 286 sites, and these sites have been described and analyzed by a group called the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility from Silver Springs, Maryland, and one of their representatives is Kayla Bennett. So what they've done is they've looked throughout the country at all the sites, and then they've ranked the different states, and they've done it county by county to give us kind of a heads up that we have to be aware of these and try to mitigate the dangers of these sites. One of our local representatives who is very tuned into this and has done a lot in terms of environmental responsibility is Adrienne Esposito. She is the executive director of the Citizens Campaign for the Environment based in Farmingdale. These generally have been regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, so we have really a nationwide agency that tries to look at these issues, regulate any bad chemicals or chemicals that have possible carcinogenic side effects, and really deal with those chemicals, deal with those issues, and try to resolve them. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, the EPA lists 8,163 PFASs. So, when you're thinking about this, you can become a little bit overwhelmed. You say 8,163. Well, how can we regulate something that is that large? They're what we call forever chemicals. So the problem with them is they do not disappear. They have a very long life. So getting rid of them is obviously going to be an issue. They are used as stain repellents, and there's a large market for that, 1 billion annually it's estimated at. And they're also used in polishes and paints and coatings, 100 million annual market. So part of the problem is that these chemicals, they're used in many things that we just kind of take for granted on an everyday basis. And they generate a lot of money for our economy. So you always get into this kind of debate, between, well, what's good for the economy, what's good for the environment, how do we balance it out? We don't want to take people's jobs away, obviously. We don't want to hurt people. We want to do things that are good for everyone. We want to promote well-being for people. So you've got this conflict. Well, it's a possible carcinogenic, yet it's good for the economy. How do you kind of balance this out? And how do you create something that's good for everyone and where you're protecting people's health? The problem is that the molecules can accumulate in humans and lead to adverse health effects. Some of the adverse health effects are thyroid disease, increased levels of cholesterol, liver damage, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, and also we see effects on the unborn child. Delayed mammary gland development, reduced response to vaccines, lower birth weight, So these are what they call high certainty effects from the PFAS chemicals. There are also other effects that are not as high in certainty. So a lot of this, of course, scientists are trying to determine with more exactitude, so it takes a while. But these are things where there is a concern, but not at the highest level in terms of the other possible health effects that I mentioned earlier. So some of these effects would be inflammatory bowel disease, increased time in pregnancy, breast cancer, and in terms of the unborn child, possible obesity, early puberty onset, increased risk of miscarriage, low sperm count, and mobility. So those are some with lower certainty. Also, when the European countries took a look at this in the European Union, they said, well, part of the problem here is, you see, the positive effect on the economy in terms of job creation, in terms of making people's life easier to more convenient, certainly, is the high health cost. So you have to balance out. You might think, well, this is great for the economy, but then what about the health cost? What about the amount of money we're paying in terms of health? They estimated 52 to 84 billion euros in terms of health costs. So in those countries, they're trying to do, obviously, environmental screening, monitoring where any contamination is found. They do water treatment, soil remediation, health assessment costs, and those would be 821 billion to 170 billion. So there are health costs immediately in terms of treating people, but then in terms of the other side effects of these chemicals, you have to take care of the soil. You have to make sure that this is contained, treat the water that is adversely affected by the chemicals, and also assess the effects and do all the testing necessarily to do that assessment properly. So you can see the complexity of this problem. Well, you've got health costs, but then you've got environmental damage costs, and these can add up to quite a huge sum. So people talk about, well, the economy, and we have to do what's good for the economy, but then you also have these other effects that kind of drag the economy down. They're negative in terms of the economy. They're listed, the PFAS are listed as persistent organic pollutants under the Stockholm Convention. So they are persistent pollutants. They don't just come for a certain amount of time. They are there, as we said, forever chemicals. And that is due to their ubiquitous, persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic nature. So they're all around because of they're used in so many products, over 8,000 products. So how do you deal with that huge number of products? They're persistent. They're not going to go away. And they're bioaccumulative. So they stay in different organisms. And of course, you have the problem of eating certain fish, eating certain wildlife, and they've been feeding on different levels of vegetation where the PFAS might be in them, so they become bioaccumulative. And they also have a very toxic nature, so in combination you can see the difficulty that is going to create. Now, why do we say forever chemicals? We say forever chemicals because of the carbon-fluorine bond. It's extremely long environmental half-life because of the bonding of the carbon with the fluorine. The per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances are replaced with the short-chain PFASs, such as the perfluoroxonic acid, PFHXA, the perfluorobutane sulfonic acid, and the perfluorobutane sulfonate, the PFBSs. So what you're trying to do is replace these long-lasting PFASs with other chemicals that are not going to be as long-lasting, which of course is a good way to deal with it. So it's not going to be this persistent problem. It's not going to be as bioaccumulative. they're not going to be these forever chemicals. They're going to have a much shorter life, and that certainly is the direction that chemists are moving in with those. And shorter fluorosurfactants may be less prone to accumulating in mammals. And again, this is going to be studied and looked at. So it's good to kind of be aware of this issue and see how we can handle it.